Columbus, Ohio, April 1st, 2006. The night is alive with music, neon, and the restless energy of spring. Bars overflow with students, laughter echoes down High Street, and the air smells faintly of rain on warm pavement. Amid this chaos, a young man named Brian Shaffer walks into a bar with friends. He's smiling, he's laughing, he's celebrating the end of exams and the beginning of spring break. A few hours later, surveillance cameras capture him stepping into the crowded entranceway of the ugly Tuna Saloona, and then he's gone. Not a single camera shows him leaving. No witness remembers seeing him exit. His car is untouched, his phone silent, his apartment undisturbed. Brian Shaffer simply vanished. Almost 2 decades later, investigators, friends, and strangers on the internet are still haunted by the question: how can a man walk into a bar full of people and never walk out? It was Friday, March 31st, 2006. Brian Shaffer was 27 years old, tall, lean, with a warm smile and shaggy brown hair that gave him a laid-back, surfer-like look. He wasn't just another medical student grinding through endless textbooks and clinical rotations. He was a dreamer. Friends say he loved Pearl Jam, that his ambition wasn't only to practice medicine, but to combine healing with his passion for music. He talked about becoming a doctor who also played in a band, someone who treated patients during the day and wrote songs at night. But beneath his easygoing charm, there were cracks. Just weeks earlier, Brian's life had been shaken by tragedy. His mother, Renee, had lost her battle with cancer. Her death weighed heavily on him, though he didn't always show it. That night, Brian's girlfriend, Alexis, wasn't with him. She had traveled back to her hometown to visit family before their upcoming Miami trip. So, Brian made plans with a friend, William Clint Florence. Together, they decided to hit the bars along High Street. They started early, grabbing a few drinks at a couple of neighborhood spots before making their way toward the ugly Tuna Saloona, a quirky second-floor bar inside the South Campus Gateway complex. The ugly Tuna wasn't the classiest place in town, but it was lively, popular with students, and offered cheap drinks, loud music, and a big dance floor. It was around 9 p.m. when Brian and Clint arrived. The bar was already buzzing, bodies weaving in and out of the entrance, a crowd pressed shoulder to shoulder inside, bartenders slinging shots, and a DJ blasting top 40 hits over the dance floor. The entrance itself was covered by surveillance cameras, and those cameras would become crucial later. First, everything seemed normal. The two friends had a few more drinks, mingled with the crowd, and laughed their way through the night. Around midnight, Brian called Alexis. He told her he loved her, reassured her about their Miami trip, and promised he'd see her soon. It was a casual, affectionate call, nothing to suggest that anything was wrong. As the night wore on, Brian and Clint met up with another friend, Meredith. Together, the group moved through the bar, drinking, dancing, and blending into the chaos of a typical Friday night. But then, sometime around 1:15 a.m., things took a strange turn. Brian told his friends he wanted to step away for a moment, maybe to talk to someone, maybe just to catch his breath. Clint and Meredith assumed he'd be right back. They stayed behind, chatting, finishing their drinks. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Eventually, last call was announced. The lights flickered, the music dropped, and the crowd began spilling toward the exits. Clint and Meredith waited near the front entrance, expecting Brian to return. But he never did. They searched for him in the bar, checked the restrooms, circled the dance floor. Nothing. By 2 a.m., the bar had emptied. Clint and Meredith walked outside, scanning the sidewalks. No Brian. They tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. At first, they assumed he'd caught a ride with someone else, or maybe decided to walk home. But when morning came, Brian didn't answer calls, didn't show up at his apartment, didn't check in with Alexis. And when he missed their flight to Miami on Monday, the trip he had been so excited about, the truth began to set in. Brian Shaffer was gone. Police would later pull the security footage from the ugly Tuna's cameras. There he was, Brian, captured on grainy black and white video, standing just outside the entrance at around 1:55 a.m. He's laughing, chatting with two young women. He looks relaxed, animated, fully alive. And then he steps just inside the entranceway. That's the last anyone ever sees of him. The cameras show Clint and Meredith leaving the bar a short while later. They also show the women Brian had been talking to. They show countless other patrons walking in and out of the Ugly Tuna that night. But they never show Brian leaving. Not through the front entrance. Not through the back service exit. Not at all. It was as if he vanished into the walls of the bar itself. When Brian didn't show up the next morning, friends brushed it off as a hangover or a spontaneous decision to crash at someone's place. He was 27. He was in med school. He was allowed to have a wild Friday night. But by Saturday afternoon, Alexis, his girlfriend, grew anxious. Brian wasn't answering his phone. He wasn't responding to texts. And Brian wasn't the type to vanish without a word. By Sunday, panic had set in. When he failed to appear at Port Columbus International Airport for his flight to Miami on Monday morning, the trip he had been planning with Alexis for weeks, she knew something was terribly wrong. Brian loved to travel. He was counting down the days. There was no way he'd miss that flight willingly. That same day, Alexis filed a missing persons report. The Columbus Division of Police began by retracing Brian's last known steps. The Ugly Tuna Saloona was their starting point. Detectives pulled the surveillance footage from the bar. The images were grainy but clear enough. Brian arriving with Clint. Brian inside the bar, drinking, laughing. The Brian making his way to the entrance around 1:55 a.m. Brian chatting with two women outside. Brian stepping back into the entrance. And then nothing. No footage of him leaving. Detectives combed through hours of video. They scrutinized every frame. They watched every patron come and go. Brian never appeared again. It was a paradox. A man enters a bar but never exits. At first, investigators wondered if Brian had slipped out unnoticed. But the Ugly Tuna only had two main ways in or out. 1. The front entrance covered by cameras. 2. A service exit at the back which led to a poorly lit alley. Police checked the footage. Nobody matching Brian's description was seen leaving through the front. The service exit was trickier. The angle of the cameras didn't capture it perfectly. Still, police believed someone should have noticed him. And yet, no one did. It was almost as if he had disappeared into thin air. Detectives interviewed the people Brian had been with that night. Clint Florence, his friend, said Brian had been drinking heavily, but he wasn't stumbling drunk. Clint claimed Brian had stepped away, and when he didn't return, Clint assumed he'd gone home or met up with someone. Meredith Reed, the mutual friend, said much the same. She remembered seeing Brian talking to two women, then heading toward the entrance, and then nothing. The two women Brian spoke with confirmed their brief conversation. They said he had seemed friendly, upbeat, and completely normal. They didn't notice him leave. No one did. For Brian's family, the disappearance was like a cruel joke. His father, Randy Shaffer, was devastated. Already grieving the recent loss of his wife, he now faced the unthinkable, a missing son. Randy spent every spare moment putting up posters, giving interviews, pleading for leads. Alexis, Brian's girlfriend, was inconsolable. She called his phone every single day, leaving voicemails, hoping he would pick up. For weeks, she said she dialed his number constantly, just to hear his voice on the recording. She refused to believe he was gone. Police expanded their investigation beyond the bar. They searched Brian's apartment. Everything was in order. His bed was made. His clothes were neatly hung. His car sat untouched in the parking lot. Nothing suggested he had packed up and left voluntarily. They checked hospitals, homeless shelters, and morgues. No trace. They even searched the nearby Olentangy River, dragging sections of it in case Brian had somehow fallen in. Again, nothing. Flyers were posted around Columbus. News stations aired his story. His face appeared across the city, and still not a single confirmed sighting. With little evidence, speculation began to swirl. Some suggested Brian might have fallen victim to foul play, lured out of the bar and attacked. But why? He wasn't known to have enemies. He wasn't involved with drugs or gangs. Others believed he might have left voluntarily, walking away from his old life. After all, he had been under immense stress. Medical school, the death of his mother, the pressure of adulthood. Could Brian have staged his own disappearance? But to those who knew him, that theory didn't fit. Brian adored Alexis. He was planning a future with her. He was days away from vacation. His medical career was on track. And his mother's death, though tragic, made it even less likely he would abandon his grieving father. And then there were darker theories. Some whispered about the so-called smiley face killer, a supposed serial killer believed to target college-aged men. Others wondered if Brian had been a victim of human trafficking, or if he'd somehow stumbled into something sinister inside the ugly tuna itself. But every theory hit the same wall: no evidence. Then came one of the most chilling details of the case. For weeks after his disappearance, Brian's cell phone would occasionally ring when Alexis called. Not always, but sometimes. The calls weren't answered. They went to voicemail. But the fact that the phone rang instead of going straight to voicemail suggested the device was powered on. Could it mean Brian was alive? When police contacted the phone company, the explanation was less hopeful. The ringing sound, they said, didn't necessarily mean the phone was active. It could simply be a network quirk. But to Alexis, those rings were a lifeline. She clung to them. She left message after message, begging Brian to come home. Detectives returned, again and again, to the ugly tuna. They reconstructed the night. They studied the blind spots in the camera system. They considered whether Brian could have disguised himself to slip out unnoticed. But nothing made sense. Every scenario felt impossible. A man doesn't just vanish from a crowded bar. And yet, Brian Shaffer had. The deeper police dug into the case, the stranger it became. Brian wasn't the type of man who vanished without a trace. He wasn't reckless. He wasn't a drifter. He was a future doctor. He was a son still grieving his mother. He was a man in love. And yet, in the span of just a few minutes, he was gone. Detectives quickly turned their attention to Brian's companions that night. Clint Florence, the friend who had gone bar hopping with him, became a person of interest. Not because there was any proof he'd harmed Brian, but because of how little he seemed to help. When asked to take a polygraph test, Clint refused. His lawyer advised against it, and legally he was under no obligation. But to investigators, and especially to the public, his refusal raised eyebrows. Why wouldn't a close friend cooperate fully in the search for a missing man? Meredith Reed, the other friend who had joined them that night, did take a polygraph. She passed. But Clint's silence lingered like a shadow over the investigation. Other witnesses were questioned. Some bar staff claimed they hadn't seen anything unusual. Others remembered Brian talking with the two women outside. But no one recalled seeing him leave. The women he spoke with outside said the encounter was brief, friendly, and unremarkable. He didn't appear intoxicated. He didn't mention leaving. He simply stepped back toward the bar's entrance and disappeared. What made the case even stranger was the surveillance angle. Every entrance and exit was covered, except for one narrow blind spot near a service stairwell. Could Brian have slipped out there? Police checked. The stairwell led to construction areas, scaffolding, and a hard-to-navigate path that eventually connected to High Street. If Brian left through there, it would have been risky, confusing, and dangerous. But it was possible. Still, no one saw him. No camera caught him. Not one person remembered a tall, 27-year-old med student vanishing into the night. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, became the face of the search. Every interview, every press conference, every flyer, Randy was there. His voice shook with grief but carried with determination. He spoke of Brian's dreams, of his kindness, of the absurdity of his disappearance. He pleaded with anyone who might know something to come forward. But behind the scenes, Randy also carried suspicion. He wondered why Clint avoided contact, why some friends were less cooperative than others. And then, just 3 years later, tragedy struck again. Randy Shaffer died suddenly in a freak storm when a tree fell on him outside his home. His death left Brian's brother, Derek, as the last surviving immediate family member. For many, Randy's passing symbolized the cruel weight of the mystery. A father never given answers about his missing son. With little evidence, speculation filled the void. Theory 1, foul play. Perhaps Brian left with someone he trusted. Maybe he met with a stranger. Maybe something sinister happened in the alleyways or construction zones around the bar. But if so, where was the evidence? Where was the body? Theory 2, voluntary disappearance. Could Brian have run away to start a new life? Some pointed to his grief after his mother's death. Others noted his love of travel and music, especially Pearl Jam. Could he have staged his vanishing act? To many, this theory felt like an insult. His family insisted he would never abandon them or Alexis. Theory 3, the smiley face killer. Some true crime followers tied Brian's case to a string of mysterious disappearances of college-aged men across the Midwest. All vanished near water. Many were later found drowned. Brian's case fit the pattern, except no body was ever found. Theory 4, accident. Maybe Brian had been intoxicated, wandered into a construction zone, and suffered a fatal fall. Perhaps his body was hidden in the chaos of building materials. But exhaustive searches turned up nothing. As the years passed, Brian's disappearance took on a second life online. Web sleuths forums buzzed with theories. True crime podcasts dissected every second of surveillance footage. Amateur detectives pored over timelines, interviews, and maps of the ugly tuna. The mystery became larger than life. A man swallowed by a bar. Some claimed to see Brian in blurry background photos from concerts. Others reported sightings in faraway states. None were ever confirmed. Every time hope flickered, it was extinguished by silence. Perhaps the most haunting detail of all came from Brian's cell phone. Weeks after his disappearance, Alexis continued calling. Sometimes the calls went straight to voicemail, but other times the line rang. Once, the phone even pinged a cell tower in Hilliard, a suburb of Columbus. Was Brian alive? Was his phone stolen? Or was it simply a technical anomaly? To Alexis, it felt like proof he was still out there. To investigators, it was maddening, a breadcrumb that led nowhere. Every lead collapsed. Every theory bent under the weight of missing evidence. The ugly tuna was searched multiple times, including closed-off areas. Nothing. The river was dragged. Nothing. Witnesses were re-interviewed. No new clues emerged. The case grew colder with each passing year. And the last image of Brian Shaffer, smiling, talking with two women before stepping back inside the bar, became frozen in time. The years passed, but the mystery only deepened. Brian Shaffer's disappearance wasn't just another cold case. It became part of the identity of Columbus, Ohio. To the students at Ohio State, the ugly Tuna Saloon was no longer just a bar. It was the last known location of a young man who seemed to vanish into thin air. It became a symbol, a landmark of unanswered questions. Every anniversary of Brian's disappearance brought renewed headlines. Local news stations replayed the same grainy footage of him laughing with friends, waving to the women outside, then stepping out of frame forever. Each year, flyers resurfaced. Missing Brian Shaffer. His photo, tall, handsome, with brown hair and kind eyes, stared back at passersby in coffee shops and on telephone poles. The city couldn't let it go, and neither could the internet. For Alexis Wagner, Brian's longtime girlfriend, the pain was unbearable. She'd been waiting for a proposal. She was waiting for a future, and instead, she was left with silence. She called his phone night after night. She sent him messages that were never read. She dreamed of him walking through the door. But as the years wore on, even Alexis had to face the truth. She eventually moved forward with her life, though she never stopped believing that what happened to Brian deserved answers. When asked years later about him, her voice still cracked. "I don't think he just left. Someone knows what happened." Detectives assigned to the case rotated in and out. Fresh eyes brought fresh energy, but the evidence pool remained dry. No body, no confirmed sightings, and no trace of financial activity, and no digital trail. It was as though Brian had been erased from existence. As public attention waned and then reignited, the same theories circled back. Some swore the smiley face killer theory was the answer. They pointed to dozens of similar cases, young men disappearing near bars later found drowned. But skeptics argued that connecting Brian's case to that theory was a stretch. Others insisted Brian staged his own disappearance. They argued he was overwhelmed by grief after his mother's death, by pressure in medical school, and by the expectations of a relationship. Maybe he left to start fresh. But to those who knew him best, that explanation didn't sit right. Brian loved Alexis. He loved his family. He had dreams. He wasn't the type to vanish without a word. Perhaps the most haunting layer of Brian's story is his love of music. He was obsessed with Pearl Jam, a band that often sang about life, death, and fleeting moments. At one concert, Eddie Vedder even dedicated a song to Brian after his disappearance. Fans in the arena felt chills. Thousands of voices sang into the night, a tribute to a man who should have been there singing along. It was a reminder that Brian wasn't just a missing person. He was a fan, a son, a brother, a boyfriend, a human being whose absence left ripples across the world. As time dragged on, frustration turned to anger. Why hadn't police pressed Clint Florence harder? Why hadn't security footage revealed more? Why had the bar's construction zones been so poorly searched? The public demanded justice, but justice never came. Brian's case remains open. His file sits on shelves in Columbus Police Headquarters, waiting for the piece of evidence that might finally bring closure. Today, Brian's disappearance has grown into something bigger than a case file. College students still talk about him in hushed tones. Some refuse to drink at the Ugly Tuna, calling it cursed. Others visit deliberately, hoping to feel the chill of standing where Brian stood. The bar itself eventually closed, its name forever tied to a haunting mystery. But the legend lingers, whispered among students, debated online, and dissected by true crime enthusiasts worldwide. Brian Shaffer's story endures because it's terrifyingly simple. A young man walked into a bar and never walked out. That one sentence alone chills to the bone. Because if it could happen to him, it could happen to anyone. His friends, his family, his community, they're all still haunted by the question, where is Brian Shaffer? The Ugly Tuna Saloona was once just another bar near the Ohio State University campus. A place where students celebrated passing exams, first dates, and Friday nights. But after April 1st, 2006, it became infamous. When people walked through its glass doors, they whispered Brian's name. His last known steps were replayed in their minds, burned into the camera footage. The bar transformed from a party spot into a place haunted by questions. Even as the years rolled by, the Ugly Tuna couldn't escape its shadow. No matter what music was playing, no matter how loud the laughter, there was always a quiet weight in the room. By 2018, the bar shut its doors for good, but its reputation lived on. For locals, it wasn't just another closed business. It was the place where a man disappeared without explanation. Brian's disappearance didn't just stay in Columbus. Thanks to early true crime blogs, podcasts, and eventually YouTube, his case spread worldwide. The footage of him smiling, waving, then vanishing became viral. Forums like Reddit dissected every frame, arguing about shadows in the background, gaps in security coverage, and the body language of Clint and Meredith. Armchair detectives across the globe spent sleepless nights trying to solve what seasoned investigators couldn't. Was there a blind spot in the cameras? Did someone inside the bar help him out through a staff-only exit? Or was it something more sinister? An abduction, a murder, a cover-up? Theories grew like wildfire. And with each passing year, Brian's case became one of the internet's most analyzed mysteries. For Ohio State students, Brian wasn't just a name in the news. He was one of them. Every incoming class learned the story. Professors mentioned it when discussing campus safety. Seniors warned freshmen about the dangers of nightlife. Some students admitted they chose not to party at certain bars because of Brian. Others confessed they felt chills every time they walked past the building where the Ugly Tuna once stood. To this day, campus culture holds Brian's name like an unspoken reminder. Bad things can happen in the safest seeming places. Over the years, private investigators joined the search. Families, friends, and even strangers donated money to fund independent efforts. Dogs were brought in to search construction zones. The nearby river was scanned with sonar. Abandoned buildings were combed through. Every lead ended the same way, with nothing. It was as though Brian had never left the ugly tuna. What made Brian's story so enduring was the people who refused to stop talking about him. His father, Randy, who never gave up searching until his tragic death from an accident in 2008. His girlfriend, Alexis, who kept Brian's memory alive long after she moved forward with her life. His friends, who admitted they couldn't understand why he vanished but still clung to the belief that someone knew something. And then there were strangers, people who had never met Brian but felt connected to his story. They wrote blog posts, created documentaries, and shared his photo every year on social media. The case became bigger than one man. It became a symbol of how fragile life is, how quickly someone can disappear, even in a crowded bar, even under surveillance cameras. There's something chilling about Brian's last image. He wasn't running. He wasn't scared. He wasn't even aware that it would be the last moment anyone ever saw him. He was smiling, laughing, waving at life. That one frozen second carries more weight than hours of CCTV footage from other cases, because it forces us to confront the scariest truth of all. We never know which moment will be our last. As the decades pass, Brian's case refuses to fade. In 2021, 15 years after his disappearance, Columbus police released another public statement. "We believe someone knows what happened to Brian Shaffer. It wasn't new information. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was proof that the case was still alive, still open, still waiting. Some mysteries dull with age. This one sharpens. Each year, the question grows louder. Where did Brian go?" The disappearance of Brian Shaffer changed more than just his family's life. It reshaped an entire city's sense of safety. It became a warning tale for college students everywhere, a subject of countless podcasts, documentaries, and internet threads. And yet, through all the noise, one truth cuts through. Brian Shaffer was a son, a brother, a boyfriend, and a friend. His life mattered. His story matters. Until the day the truth is revealed, the bar that swallowed him will remain one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in America. One of the earliest theories investigators considered was that Brian simply walked away from his life. After all, he was under immense pressure. Medical school is no easy road, and Brian had just faced the devastating loss of his mother. Friends remembered him speaking often about running away, about starting over somewhere new. Could he have left the ugly tuna that night, slipped past the cameras, and begun a new life? It sounds possible until you look deeper. Brian loved his family. He was close with his brother Derek. He was in a serious relationship with Alexis, who said he talked about proposing. Walking away would mean abandoning everyone he cared about without a word. And then there's the question of money. Brian's accounts showed no unusual withdrawals. His phone went silent. His apartment remained untouched. For a man to vanish voluntarily, he'd need resources, planning, and at least a small window of opportunity. For Brian, there's no trace of either. And yet, the theory still lingers because sometimes the simplest explanation is the hardest to disprove. The most chilling theory is that something happened to Brian inside the ugly tuna itself. Some believe he may have gotten into a fight. Others suggest an accidental injury covered up by staff or patrons. The key question: how could a body be hidden, even temporarily, in a crowded bar with security cameras rolling? Some investigators argue that the cameras didn't cover every angle. Blind spots existed. Back hallways, service corridors, and staff-only exits weren't as closely monitored. Construction work in the building at the time also provided areas where someone could have hidden a body, at least for long enough to move it later. This theory points suspicion at two groups: the bar staff and Brian's friends. But no solid evidence ever surfaced. No confession, no suspicious footage, no trace. If foul play happened inside the bar, it was pulled off with a precision that seems almost impossible. Right outside the ugly tuna, construction was underway on a new project. Open shafts, heavy machinery, and unsecured sites dotted the area. Some theorists suggest Brian might have wandered into the zone after leaving the bar and fallen to his death. It could explain why no camera caught him leaving. Perhaps he slipped out through a poorly monitored exit and stumbled into danger. But construction sites don't stay untouched. Crews worked daily. If Brian had fallen into machinery or an open pit, someone likely would have found him quickly. Unless, of course, his body became buried beneath tons of material before anyone noticed. It's possible, but it remains speculation. Here's where things take a darker, more sensational turn. Some independent investigators, particularly former New York detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, suggested Brian might be another victim of the so-called smiley face killer theory. According to them, dozens of young men across the Midwest and Northeast drowned mysteriously after nights of drinking. Near many of the locations, a crude graffiti smiley face was found. Could Brian have been targeted in a similar way? Skeptics dismiss the idea. They argue the smiley face graffiti is far too common to mean anything. They also point out that Brian's body was never found in water. But believers say his vanishing without a trace fits the chilling pattern. The last theory is the most heartbreaking. Some suggest Brian, weighed down by grief and exhaustion, may have chosen to end his life. His mother's death just weeks earlier was a heavy blow. If Brian did take his own life, the biggest question is, where? With no body, no note, and no evidence, this theory feels less likely. But suicide cases sometimes leave behind just as many unanswered questions. For Brian's loved ones, this possibility is the hardest to face, because it suggests not a mystery to solve, but a pain no one could heal. What makes Brian's disappearance so haunting isn't just the unanswered theories. It's that every theory seems both possible and impossible at the same time. If he walked away, why no trace? If foul play happened inside, why no evidence? If construction swallowed him, why no discovery? If the smiley face theory is true, why here? If suicide, why in silence? Each answer creates another question. Each theory feels like a door that only leads to another locked room. That's why Brian Shaffer's case lives on, because it's not just about one man, one night, or one bar. It's about the terrifying possibility that sometimes the truth can vanish completely. For the Shaffer family, Brian's disappearance wasn't just a mystery. It was a wound that never healed. His brother, Derek Shaffer, became the reluctant anchor of what was left of the family. Derek had already lost his mother to cancer. Now he was forced to navigate life with his father, both men holding on to hope, both quietly breaking inside. Randy Shaffer, Brian's father, refused to give up. He plastered posters across Columbus. He called detectives relentlessly. He begged for updates that rarely came. To him, Brian wasn't just missing. He was out there, somewhere waiting to be found. Columbus police continued to chase leads. They tracked Brian's cell phone, which pinged once in 2006, in a city 14 miles away. A cruel false hope, as the phone was never traced again. They interviewed every student, every friend, every staff member of the Ugly Tuna. Dozens of interviews, no solid answers. They chased rumors. Sightings in Texas, in Sweden, even online chat rooms where people swore they'd spoken to him. Every lead ended the same way, in silence. Years later, Brian's father, Randy, filed a lawsuit. He wanted the police to release Brian's medical records and investigation files, hoping something had been overlooked. The court refused. They claimed the case was still open and releasing records could jeopardize future investigations. To Randy, it felt like a door slammed shut. And then, in 2008, tragedy struck again. On September 14, 2008, as Hurricane Ike's remnants tore through Ohio, Randy Shaffer was at home. A large tree branch broke loose in the wind and struck his house. Randy was killed instantly. For Derek, it was unthinkable. In just 2 years, he had lost his mother, his brother, and now his father. The Shaffer family was nearly erased, leaving Derek as the last one standing. And Brian's disappearance remained unsolved. 2 years later, in 2010, something strange happened. A web forum called Find Brian Shaffer became a gathering place for people following the case. Out of nowhere, someone posted a chilling message. Brian is alive. He's living in the Virgin Islands. Stop searching for him. The post came from a computer trace to Franklin County, Ohio. The IP was investigated, but it led nowhere. Was it a cruel joke, a hacker, or a real breadcrumb? No one knows. But the message gave fuel to those who believed Brian was still alive. Through all of this, one person never stopped searching. Alexis Wagoner, Brian's girlfriend. She continued calling his phone long after it had been disconnected. For months, it rang before going to voicemail. Each time, she left a message. Each time, she prayed for a call back. It never came. Alexis eventually moved forward with her life, but in interviews, she admitted, "I don't think I'll ever fully believe Brian is gone. Part of me still thinks he's out there." Over the years, the ugly Tuna Saloona itself became a grim landmark. People whispered about Brian inside its walls. Paranormal groups claimed his spirit haunted the bar. Patrons snapped photos, swearing they saw shadowy figures in the background. When the ugly Tuna eventually closed its doors in 2018, some saw it as the final chapter. But the story of Brian Shaffer didn't close. If anything, it grew louder. Nearly 2 decades later, Brian's disappearance remains one of Ohio's most baffling mysteries. No body, and no evidence, no closure. His name still appears in missing persons databases. His story still circulates on podcasts, documentaries, and YouTube videos. And his case remains a chilling reminder. Sometimes, a man can vanish in plain sight, and the world may never know why. Great, let's keep moving forward with Chapter 8 of The Disappearance of Brian Shaffer, the bar that swallowed him. When Brian Shaffer vanished, few could have predicted how much his story would echo across the years. But as time passed, the mystery only grew stronger. Podcasts dedicated entire seasons to him. YouTube creators dissected his final moments frame by frame. Documentaries replayed the grainy CCTV footage, the haunting image of Brian walking into the bar, but never leaving. Every new viewer, every new listener, reacted the same way. How is this even possible? And that question became Brian's legacy. Why does this case grab us so tightly? Psychologists suggest it's because Brian's disappearance hits at the most terrifying human fear. The idea that someone can be here one moment and gone the next without reason, without trace. There was no alleyway, no abandoned car, no trail of blood. Just a man in a green shirt, stepping into a bar filled with cameras and vanishing into thin air. It's the kind of nightmare that crawls into your brain and won't leave. The Columbus Dispatch, CNN, Dateline, Rolling Stone, every outlet covered the case. The story wasn't just local anymore, it was global. And with each new article, the mystery deepened. Why was the security camera footage incomplete? Why were so many angles blocked? Why didn't police release all the files? The public started questioning not just the case itself, but the investigation. Could someone have been protected? Was evidence buried? Or was this simply an unsolvable tragedy? Brian's story became a cornerstone of internet sleuthing. On Reddit, threads with thousands of comments debated theories, from mafia involvement to secret tunnels under the ugly Tuna. On web sleuths, armchair detectives analyzed Brian's gait, his facial expressions, even the angle of his cap. Some believed he was murdered inside the bar. Others believed he left disguised, slipping past cameras with the help of friends. And then there were those who insisted he staged his own disappearance, a theory fueled by his father's death and the eerie Virgin Islands message. Every theory had its believers. Every theory had its flaws. Brian Shaffer's case has become more than a mystery. It has become a symbol, a warning. It reminds us how fragile safety is, how quickly normal can shatter, how sometimes answers never come. For Columbus locals, the ugly Tuna isn't just another bar. It's a ghost story. For the true crime world, Brian Shaffer isn't just a missing person. He's a question mark that still haunts us. When cases go cold, theories step in. And in Brian Shaffer's disappearance, the lack of hard evidence has left a vacuum. A vacuum that's been filled with speculation, rumors, and endless debate. Some theories are chillingly plausible. Others border on the unbelievable. But each one tries to answer the same question. What happened to Brian Shaffer? The most popular theory is also the darkest, that Brian never left the ugly Tuna Saloona alive. Some believe a bar fight turned deadly. Others suspect a robbery gone wrong. And some whisper about deliberate, targeted violence. The problem? There's no physical evidence. No blood. No witnesses. No cover-up proven. But still, the idea persists. Because how does a man vanish from a building filled with cameras? Unless the answer was inside. Another group believes Brian walked away on purpose. He had just lost his mother. He was under pressure in medical school. He had spoken about leaving everything behind and starting fresh. Did he stage it? Some point to the eerie fact that no money was withdrawn from his accounts. No passport activity. No sightings confirmed. But others argue that if he had truly planned to disappear, he would have left some trace of life. Unless, of course, that was the point. One of the most mundane, yet haunting theories is that Brian left unnoticed and met with an accident. Could he have slipped into construction work near the bar? Could he have fallen into the nearby river, unseen in the early hours of the morning? Police checked. They searched drains, construction zones, and waterways. Nothing. Yet, some argue that accidents don't always leave clear answers. And sometimes, bodies simply aren't found. Some theorize that Brian left the bar briefly, was abducted, and never returned. But this theory hits the same wall. The cameras never showed him leaving. Unless the angles we've seen weren't the only ones. Unless someone knew exactly where to stand. Unless the footage wasn't complete. In the years since, theories have spread beyond Columbus. And the internet has created its own explanations. Secret tunnels under the bar. A mafia involvement, a human trafficking, even bizarre theories about time slips and alternate dimensions. While most of these belong more to urban legend than fact, they speak to one truth. Brian's case has transcended crime. It's become modern folklore. Investigators today lean toward two possibilities. One, he was murdered inside or just outside the bar, and it was covered up. Two, he walked away voluntarily and built a new life. But without evidence, even experts remain divided. One detective once said, "Every year that passes makes foul play look more likely, but every year also makes voluntary disappearance harder to rule out." And so, the mystery survives. For Brian's family, the disappearance is more than a mystery. It's a wound that never closes. His father, Randy Shaffer, spent the years after 2006 tirelessly searching for answers. He handed out flyers. He gave interviews. He kept Brian's name alive. But Randy passed away in 2008, still without closure. And in a cruel twist of fate, a neighbor who tried to comfort him by lighting a candle in his memory accidentally set off a fire. Randy died in the blaze. One tragedy layered upon another. For Brian's brother, Derek, the weight of both losses has been unimaginable. Detectives admit that Brian's case haunts them. They've said, most cases fade with time. This one doesn't. Every few years, new tips trickle in. Every few years, someone claims to have seen him. In 2019, a photo of a homeless man in Mexico spread online. People swore it was Brian, but the FBI confirmed it wasn't. Another dead end. Online communities keep Brian's case alive with theories, breakdowns, and frame-by-frame analysis of that grainy CCTV. Some argue over shadows in the footage. Others dissect body language. And every year, on the anniversary of his disappearance, his name trends again. Brian Shaffer isn't just a missing person anymore. He's a symbol of the unsolvable. Each year, Ohio State University holds commencement ceremonies. Students graduate. Families cheer. But for the class of 2006, there's always one empty chair. Brian should have been there. A white coat, a diploma, a life ahead of him. Instead, he exists in photographs, memories, and the endless question, where is Brian Shaffer? At the heart of this case lies a paradox. If Brian was killed inside the bar, how was there no evidence? If he walked away voluntarily, how has he stayed hidden so perfectly? If it was an accident, how has nothing ever been found? Every possibility feels impossible. And yet, one of them has to be true. That's why Brian's story lingers, because it represents the kind of mystery we fear most, one that has no clear ending. Brian Shaffer's disappearance isn't just a case file. It's a story of grief, unanswered questions, and the haunting silence left behind. Some cases close. This one never has. And maybe that's why we can't stop looking back into the shadows of that bar, back into the night he vanished, back into the questions we still whisper. How can someone walk into a bar and never walk out?